Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back. Today we are doing a Gwent tutorial walkthrough. So I wanted to put together this video specifically because I know that the Gwent tutorial that you get at the beginning of the game is a little basic. And I don't believe that it effectively captures the game and explains the true basics that you need to get a handle on what's going on, how to play, and how to truly appreciate it. I also know that I've been reading a lot of forum posts and sensing some discord among the natives when it comes to Gwent and how the tutorial was presented and what it all means and how you really play. It really is a fun little game, or a little mini game within the game itself, and I think you're going to enjoy it once you understand it better and you get to mess around with it a little bit. So I'm going to give you a caveat up front here. Everything I say here is really just my opinion. It's just from my experience, and it is really just the way I like to play the game, and are just my thoughts on it. You may see things differently. Opinions are what make the world a wonderful place to live in, with different points of view. So please feel free to use what I'm giving you simply as a guide, and use other resources that you might find. Use your own experiences. This is not the end-all, be-all of how to play Gwent. So, without further ado, let's get started. The first thing to know is that at any time in the game, in order to check out your Gwent deck, all you need to do is come over to the System menu, and you have this Gwent deck option. So that's where we will begin. When you pull that up, you're going to be presented with a full Gwent deck interface. What that means is it's going to allow you to see all the current cards that you have, both the cards that you have allocated to a given deck and those that are still in your quote-unquote pool of cards. Now, there are different decks based on factions in the game, and each deck has its own specific cards, as well as there are neutral cards that can be part of any deck. So what does that all mean? Let's check out the decks that are available. There's a Northern Realms deck, there's a Scoia'tael deck, there's a Monsters deck, and there's a Nilfgaardian Empire deck. If you look at the decks themselves, inside a given deck you may find various cards like this. Letho of Gullet. If we go down into the deck and look more closely, you'll find things like the Black Infantry Archer and the Siege Engineer. If you look to the left-hand side of these cards, you see this banner or heraldry that is on the card itself. That indicates that this card is specific to a given deck or a given faction. So all the ones with the black banner on them, they are going to be your Nilfgaardian Empire cards. The reason this is important is because these cards can only be part of a deck that is championed by a leader of the Nilfgaardian Empire. So what you cannot have is, you can see on the left here, we have our pool of cards, right? It shows us that we have an Impenetrable Fog, Clear Weather, and a Letho of Gullet card. If we go back to our Northern Realms deck, and we start looking around here, we can see that Letho of Gullet is not here. Okay? And your pool of cards is specific to the deck itself. It's not specific across all decks. So what does that mean? If you look at the weather cards that we have here, these are special cards. We'll talk about that in a second. You can see that here you see I have 2 Biting Frost, 2 Impenetrable Fog, a Torrential Rain, and a Clear Weather. But if I go to the Nilfgaardian Empire deck, it shows that I only have 1 Impenetrable Fog and 1 Clear Leather in my pool of cards. That's because I've already allocated them over here in my deck for Nilfgaardian Empire. This means that your neutral cards, your special cards, cards that can be part of any deck, just because you have them in one deck doesn't mean you can't use them in another deck. which is nice. So you can set up multiple decks with these special cards or these neutral cards, and you don't have to worry about pulling a card out of one deck and putting it in another and going back and forth. You can set them up however you want because they are generic to the individual. They are generic to all decks. They do not just exist in one deck or another. So that's nice. So what kinds of cards are there that make up a deck, and what is a deck? Let's talk about what a deck is to begin with. A deck is made up of at least 22 unit cards and at most 10 special cards. Each deck has a leader. Each faction has a number of leaders that can be used to champion that given deck. So let's take a look at leaders. You can see at the bottom of the screen here, there is a change leaders option. If you choose that, you get the option to select from among the leader cards that you have available to you. Each leader has a special ability that can be used once during a given round, or sorry, during a given game of Gwent. A game of Gwent consists of up to 3 rounds, but the leader's ability can only be used during one of those rounds and then is not available for the rest of the game. As you switch between leaders, it does not change the composition of your deck. It allows you to just swap out leaders, so that way when you do choose a leader, you don't have to go through and rebuild your deck over and over again, which is nice. So what kind of cards exist in a deck? There are special cards, and there are attack cards, we'll call them. We'll call them point cards. Special cards are cards that perform some sort of action, and your point cards are cards that accumulate points on the board. The whole object to winning a round of Gwent and subsequently a game is being able to have more points than your opponent at the end of a given round so that you can win the round. So let's take a look at some of these special cards and what they do. Special cards will be things like weather cards. If you go up here to the top of your card collection, your card pool that I'll call it, you have the ability to filter out various cards based on their function. So over here we have our special card list. A special card is something like Biting Frost. When you mouse over a card or you highlight over it, you have the ability to inspect it and see what type of abilities the given card has. So we're looking at Biting Frost right now. This says sets the strength of all close combat cards to 1 for both players. What in the hell does that mean? So there are different types of combat cards or point cards. The ones that have the swords on them are close combat cards. The ones that have the bow on them are ranged cards, and the ones that have the the catapult on them are your siege cards. They each play in a different row on the Gwent board, and what the weather card does is it affects each one of these individual ones affects a different row. So if we look at Biting Frost, it affects all of the close combat cards. Impenetrable Fog affects all of the ranged combat cards, and Torrential Rain affects all of the siege combat cards. I'm hoping that kind of makes sense. Once you see them in action, they will make more sense, but I think an explanation is due before you get into it. Another neutral card to point out here is Zoltan Chevet. He is not specific to any one faction. You can see that he does not have a banner on his card. He is a combat card, but he is not a faction combat card. So you can see the difference here. One has the banner, one does not. That would mean that Zoltan would be available just like these special cards across all of your decks. A couple of their special cards would be like a decoy, your commander's horn. You can see that there is a card down here among these combat cards that looks a little bit different. That's because this is a hero card. Now, hero cards are special insofar as they generally tend to have a higher point value than most of your other cards, and you can see they have a special ability. It says not affected by any special cards or abilities. So what does that mean? This means that if this card were to be played, you can see that it's a close combat card because it has the sword, and your opponent were to play Biting Frost, or for that matter, you were to play Biting Frost. It says sets the strength of all close combat cards to 1 for both players. This would have absolutely no effect on Vernon Roach because he is immune to its effects. The same as if you were to use your Commander's Horn card, which says doubles the strength of all units in that row. This would have no effect on Vernon Roach. So the hero cards are great, but you need to know when to play them and where to play them and how to play them, and you really get a feel for that through just experience and how to stack them up with the various other special cards in the deck. Let's talk about some special abilities that appear on your combat cards that you should know about. The first special ability is called Tight Bond. Tight Bond, if you play it, if you were to play, let's get off that card because I don't have multiple of it. So let's call the Reaver's Dragon Hunter. This has the Tight Bond on it. So if we were to play this card on the board, it would have a point value of 5. Now, if we had 2 of these cards in our hand, and we played another one on the board, instead of each one of them having a point value of 5, because they are on the board together and next to one another, they will then have a point value of 10 each. So it goes from a value of 10 collectively to a value of 20 collectively. If you had a third Reaver's Dragon Hunter and played it in the same line, now it would go from a value of 15 individually to a value of 45 collectively, because you would multiply the 5 by 3, get 15. Each of them would be worth 15. The Tight Bond cards are incredibly nasty when you start pairing them up. When you have multiples, like 2 is nice, but 3 is a round winner. So definitely keep an eye out for those cards. They are very useful. The next card to take a look at is your Spy cards. Spy cards say place you on your opponent's battlefield, counts towards your opponent's total, and draw 2 cards from your deck. These are strategic cards to play. They will allow you to give your opponent the point value of the card. So you're going to actually put this card on your opponent's side of the board, but it will allow you to draw 2 cards from your deck and put them in your hand for later use. This is incredibly useful in a number of different situations, which we will see when we're going to go through 1, 2, maybe 3 games, depending on what kind of draws we get, so I can show you how this is used. But just keep these in mind. The Spy cards are great, especially when you pair them with other cards, and we'll talk about the strategy associated with that in just a bit as we get into a game. Another card to be aware of are the Medic cards. The Medic card says choose 1 card from your discard pile and play it instantly. No heroes, no special cards. So what does that mean? At the end of a given round, all of the cards that were on the board on your side go into your discard pile. This card is not something you would ever play during the first round because you have no discard pile. However, once you make it into the second round, if during the first round, for instance, say you played a Trebuchet, you play this Trebuchet on the board, you either win or lose the round, either or. Once this comes off the board on your first round or second round, whatever, it goes into your discard pile. If you were to have the Medic in your hand and you were to play it the following round, you would be able to put her down and then go into your discard pile and sort through it and find your Trebuchet, grab it, and put it on the board, and it will instantly play it for you. So instead of just playing a 5-point card, you wound up playing a 5-point card and a 6-point card all at the same time. So this card is incredibly valuable, especially when paired with some other cards for some advanced strategies that we will discuss if we get it, and if not, we'll still talk about them at the end of the video just so that you are aware of them. The last card to talk about is the Winnie Siege Expert. You can see it says adds +1 to all units in the row. It's the morale boost card, and pretty much this is tied with all of your other siege unit cards, so like your catapults and your trebuchets and your medic. It'll increase their point value by 1 if it's played with them. So if you threw down the medic and then you threw down him, instead of being a 5-point value, the medic would go up to 6. Now, in other decks, there are other cards with other abilities on them. However, I'm focusing on these because I'm trying to do an early on tutorial for the cards that you probably have and are probably starting to use, whether you're out in the first zone that was kind of like your tutorial prologue area, or whether you're out in Velen now and really starting to explore the world. These are the cards that you generally will come across on your own, and they will be in your hand and a deck that you can make. Keep in mind that in making a deck, when I said before you have to have a minimum of 22 unit cards, that is the minimum number of cards you need in order to use a deck. So if we go and check out like our Nilfgaardian Empire card, you can see that I still only have 21 of 22 cards. So no matter what I do, I still cannot play this deck. I still need to find one more Nilfgaardian Empire card that's a unit card in order to fill out this deck. Now, you can put additional cards into your deck. So if we go to our Northern Realms card, you can see that I have 22 unit cards. If I want to put 23 in there, I can do that, 24, 25, however many I want to stick in there. I can absolutely do that. But in so doing, you're increasing the odds of, you're decreasing the odds of drawing other cards that you may want. So make sure you manage your deck size appropriately and only put cards in your deck that you really truly want to draw. And you're always going to have 22, but make sure the 22 that you have are 22 cards that you really want to play with, and you're not just stacking a bunch of random cards in your deck, because it will cut down on your ability to draw some of the more useful cards like your Commander's Horn or your decoys or your spies or medics or the ones that have the tight bond. There definitely is a strategy to building your deck and the number of cards in your deck. So keep that all in mind when you're setting this stuff up. If you wind up with a bunch of really great cards, then you may wind up with having a 24 unit cards in your deck because you just really want to play with 24 unit cards because that's how you want your draw to go. But that is the basics of setting up your deck. Those are the basics of some of the abilities that you'll find on your cards. If you go out to... let's go take a look at the monsters really quick here. I was talking about how some of the other decks have other cards with various abilities that we won't go into. This is one that you will see early on when you're doing one of your Gwent quests. So I wanted to take a look at it. It says find any cards with the same name in your deck and play them instantly. You're not going to have monster cards enough to build a deck early on in the game at this point, but you may play against someone that does. And what this does is it will suck all of the cards that have the identical name out and place them on the board instantly. This is incredibly nasty to play against, and it will call into question your use of weather cards. So just be aware that when this stuff happens, your board, the opponent's board, can get stacked with cards fairly quickly. So like when they have like Neckers or Vampires and they wind up pulling like 5 cards onto the board like instantly, and they go from having no points to having like 30 points. A good way to deal with that is to have a weather card ready, like a Biting Frost card ready, that you can just dump on the the board and pretty much make the cards that have been put on there null and void. So that's a little bit more advanced strategy, but it does happen, so I wanted to mention it. I didn't want to forget to tell you about that. So it's something to keep an eye out for. Once it happens to you once, it won't happen again. You'll understand and you'll plan accordingly. Everybody's deck plays a little bit differently. All of your opponent's decks play a little bit differently. So it may take 1 or 2 rounds to get a handle on what their deck looks like and how they play, so that you can structure your deck to be more effective against the individual player. That's the nice thing about being able to customize your decks. Last thing to mention before we get into the game is how you go about acquiring Gwent cards. So, Gwent cards can be acquired in a few different ways. The first is you find traders and merchants throughout the world that actually sell Gwent cards. So go ahead and track them down, and you'll be able to pick those up, spend a little bit of coin, and you will find the ability to add new Gwent cards to your deck. The second way is that throughout the world you will be given quests that are Gwent-specific quests that will have you go play Gwent against various opponents. And when you play them and win, you will be given some of the higher level cards as rewards. The last way is to find merchants, armorsmiths, traders across the world who have the option of let's play Gwent, let's play a round of cards, things along those lines. And when you play them and win, the first time that you win, you will be rewarded with a Gwent card. Unfortunately, it only works once, so you can't just play them over and over and over again and stack your deck that way. However, once you track someone down, if you play them and win, you do get a card from it. Afterwards, you generally just get some like random trash, but it's not a Gwent card. So those are the 3 ways that you'll come up with cards. The leader cards are the same way. Some of them come from quests. Others come from vendors. Just keep an eye out for all of them and build your deck as you go. So, without further ado, let's go track down someone who will play Gwent with us and get started. So here's a vendor over here.
Spot a cider.
Who says, Gwent, let's play. When you first go to play a game of Gwent, you have the ability to bet a certain number of coins. The number of coins you bet has absolutely no bearing on the reward card you get. So if you only want to bet 1, you want to bet 5, you want to bet 10, it doesn't really matter. Bet whatever you want. It really affects absolutely nothing other than the amount of money you will either win or lose based on the outcome of the game.
How about a few rounds of cards? Gwent specifically.
Alright, when you begin your game, you will always be presented with the Gwent card interface that we've been looking at since the beginning of the video. This will allow you to further customize your deck, make any last minute changes, so that when you get into the game, you have absolutely the setup that you want in order to move forward with the game. At this point, you have the ability to start the game as well as forfeit the game. So if you got into this and you're like, ah shit, I didn't want to play, you can always forfeit the game, but you will lose your money. However, if you have your deck set up and you're ready to play, choose start game and you'll get in here. The first thing you will always be presented with, whether you go first or your opponent goes first, is a selection screen that shows you the cards in your hand and allows you to add or remove cards by redrawing them. Now, the draw is random, but if you have a card that you decide, hey, you know what, I think I'd rather try for something different, this is the time to make those decisions. So this also ties in, so if you're running some extra cards in your deck that you may want to get rid of, this is a great time to do that. For me personally, as a rule of thumb, but not always, I will generally try to drop cards that don't have special abilities, or don't group well together. So I'm going to drop Vess and see if we get something better. We got Fern and Roach, which is awesome. Now you can redraw one more card, and at this point it's kind of a toss-up on what I will draw. I would really, really, really like to find a spy card, but I just don't know the likelihood of that happening. These guys work great together, and it's difficult to give them up. So I think right now we are just going to say cancel and go into the game. Okay, so our opponent has gone first, and let's talk about the game board and some of the things we're seeing on the screen. Left-hand side of the screen, that's where you should focus your attention. You will see three little card icons all stacked together, and then a number to the right of them. This is the total number of cards in either your or your opponent's deck. Keep an eye on this. Card count is generally king, so it is rare that you will massively outcard your opponents and lose. Not saying it can't happen, but early on, that's a good rule of thumb to stick with. Next to those are two of these little rubies. These are your life gems. When all of your life gems are gone, you've lost. Every round that, if you lose a round, or your opponent loses a round, one of the little life gems will crack and fade away. This is how you know where you are in standing and whether or not you can pass a round, give up a round, draw a round, anything along those lines. To the right of that is a number in bold. This is the total number of points on the board for the given player. So you can see that our opponent has a bold 1, and you can see on the board he has placed one close combat card with a point value of 1. So that is his total point value, and the reason it has that little half wreath around it is because he has the highest point value right now, so it's showing him as winning. The other thing to note is that up at the top you see a picture of his commander. It does not tell you what his commander's ability is. You can't go up there and look at it unless you go all the way up and mouse over, and then you can figure out what it is. So there's not just an X to get there. You just need to kind of mouse over there or controller over there, whatever you're doing, and that'll give you the ability to see what kind of commander he's running and what abilities it has. This one is King Foltest from Temeria, and he has the ability to pick an impenetrable fog card out of his deck and play it instantly. Nothing too crazy. We're not too worried about that. What this square is right here, this is where all of the weather cards that get played on the board will show up. It's just a kind of like a little holding area for them before they get dumped into your discard pile. So nothing too crazy yet, right? Everything still make kind of sense. The next thing to talk about is the board itself. So there are 3 sections on either player's board. The first has a sword icon in it. Those are your close combat section, card section. Here is your ranged card section, and here's your siege card section. You can see that these little icons correspond to the yellow icons that you see on the cards in your hand. And that is the section that they're going to be played in. So these siege cards will go here, any ranged cards will go here, and any of the close combat cards will go here. So pretty basic on the placement. Over here you have special card slots. So for instance, our Commander's Horn card would actually not get played in any one of these areas here. It would in fact get played over here. Hopefully that'll make sense. Let's get into a game and break it down and see how this goes. So first things first, we are going to match his play here. We don't really have anything else to do at this point. Oh, that's great to see that on the board. So what was that? That card was a spy card. If we go up and inspect it, place on your opponent's battlefield counts towards your opponent's total and draw 2 cards from your deck. So what he did was he gave us 4 points, but he wound up drawing 2 cards. This lets us talk about the decoy card. The decoy card is great for removing a card from your board and placing it back in your hand. What we're going to do is we're going to use our decoy card to steal his spy card off the board and put it in our hand. He had another spy card. He was sneaky. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this spy card that we took off our board, and we are going to put it on his board and draw 2 cards. Alright. We were hoping for a decoy card. We didn't get it. Now that he's passed, however, we are going to have to make a decision on whether we want to try to win the round or we want to let him have it and go on to round number 2 and win the round there. You've got 2 options at this point. Or you've got a quandary here, and it's a little bit easier than it might normally be. So if you had really built up his side with your spy cards, so say you had the 5-point spy card and you'd stuck that over here along with this 4-point spy card, well, now he'd have 10 points to your 2, and it may be a little difficult to beat him out of this round when he has 10 points, but because he only has 5, it's actually not too difficult for us to beat him if we simply drop 2 more additional cards on the board. Now you can see right now we are both at a 5. So in the first round, if I were to pass, it would be considered a draw for this round, and we would both lose a life gem, which would mean next round both of us have to win. If you don't win the next round, you lose the game. However, we are really just going to play 1 more card, and we are going to win the round. So you can see these are those tight bond cards. Every time we played them, their value went up just a little bit. So we've got the these are the poor fucking infantry cards. So you can see instead of having individual point values of 1, since there are 3 of them on the board, they now have individual point values of 3. Now we are going to pass because you can see the little wreath is around our score of 10 and win the round. So now that we won, one of his little life gems went away. So now it gets interesting because he actually has a higher card count than we do. But we're looking at a very powerful hand at the moment. The reason I say that is because we've got 2 of our tight bond guys, and then we also have a ton of siege weaponry. We've got a hero card, we've got a guy that buffs our siege weaponry, and we have this commander's horn, which doubles the strength of all unit cards in that row, and it says limit to 1 row. What does that mean? That pretty much means that if we were to drop down all of our siege units and then use this on them, it would pretty much double the value of all the siege units that we have on the board, and we are going to see that now. So we're going to start out with now, if you remember this guy, he was the Cadweni Siege Expert. He increases the power of all the units in that row by 1. So as soon as we drop one of these siege engines down, it's actually going to go from 6 to 7. See that? And then we're going to drop down another siege engine. You can see that one goes up to 7 as well. And here's the medic card. So you see, what card is he going to pull from his deck? He is going to pull the spy card out of his deck, play it on our side, which gave him 2 additional cards. So, which is another reason that medic card is so nice, because it really will allow you to pull your spy cards out that someone may have put on your side and replay them It's kind of like a post-round decoy card for pulling spies out of your deck if you didn't get to decoy it off the board to begin with. So I'm glad that that happened, so you got to see how that works. However, even with the cards he has, I really don't believe that he has the deck to beat us. And I say that because I've played this guy a few times just screwing around, and I haven't seen anything that scared me too much. So you can see, once again, tight bond cards. They went from 5 each to 10 each. We got Vernon Roach. We're going to drop him down. Now, the problem we're going to run into is that we only have one card left, and although it is a powerful card, it will put us in a position to allow him to play up to 4 more times without any repercussions or responses from us. So what you generally would like to be able to do is to get through the whole round without your opponent having more cards than you, especially when you're playing with Foltest like this that I am, because it's unlikely that he has a rain card, which will totally screw our 31 points of siege engines that we have down here. So what we're going to do is we're going to play our leader card, clear off the board of weather, and even though we know he probably has a rain card, we're going to play our horn here. And hedge our bets. So normally you might play that rain card down on your siege engines, but just because, or you might play that commander's horn down on your siege engines, but just in case he had a rain card, we wanted to kind of hedge our bets in case they got taken out. So that's it for our first round. You can see we only went 2 rounds with him. We wound up beating him. You saw a couple advanced strategies go on there, especially when you saw him use that medic.
I'm a right and randy dandy.
Me?
The ladies
What,
find me
Spot a cider?
And you got to see that we received some random trash as a reward. So let's go ahead and play again.
How about a few rounds of cards? Gwent specifically.
Wild hunt, take them all.
And we're going to stick with our same deck. Once again, we get presented with the draw-redraw interface. So why do I keep clear weather in here? Because I already have clear weather available from Foltest. Well, I kind of like to use it as a special discard redraw at the beginning when it pops up. And sometimes you want to clear weather cards. It really is dependent on what you're rocking when you get into the game, what your deck looks like. So we're going to get rid of Siegfried, and we don't have Roy. I don't know why we don't have Roy. We're going to get rid of Siegfried, and we are actually going to get rid of the clear weather card. See what we get. Damn. Okay, so we wound up getting 2 spy cards. When I have 2 spy cards like this at the beginning of a round, I generally will say I'm conceding this round to my opponent, and I will get them both out of my hand in the first round. Those are not the cards we wanted. We really wanted a decoy. Okay, we got a commander's horn, not a decoy. That'll do. So he's playing some really low-brow, low-value cards right now. And that's what you would do if someone was doing this to you, if you wanted to see what else they were going to get out of their hand before ending the round. Now, he's got 11 points. There's nothing we're going to put on the board that is going to match him that will be a worthwhile investment for us. So since we've already stacked his hand with cards, we've done our draws, we're just going to go ahead and pass and concede this round. Okay, so he put a spy card on our board, and it's going into our discard pile, which means we're going to be able to use our medic to pull it out and play it ourselves if we so desire. So now that we have kind of gone the route we did with him, we are going to need to win the next 2 rounds. And you did see a special ability pop up at the beginning of the round here. It said Northern Realms, card draw, blah, blah, blah. And our opponent got the option to, not the option, got the ability to draw an additional card from his deck at the beginning of the turn. We're going to get that same thing next turn. So right now we are actually going to pop down one of these little guys and see how he wants to play this. He may pass this round, depending on what we put out here. So we're still going to play another one of these guys. Okay, so he passed, which means all we need to do to win this round is play one of these guys. Let's hold on. I'm trying to determine whether it's good to medic out this round and play the... So you probably should have played the medic first, but you never know whether they're going to pass or not. But the question is, if we play the medic and then play the spy, and we want to give him 4 points this round, that puts him at 12. And then what does it take for us to get 12 points on the board? I think with the medic, that's 9 and 5. Yes, that'll work. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to play our medic. We're going to grab him. Stick him on the board. That gives our opponent 12 points. That allows us to play our additional poor fucking infantryman and put him down. And that should give us 14, which means we're going to win the round now. We will now pass. And that really didn't do us any good. But in the third round, these guys really are only going to be useful for pulling cards out of weather and back into your hand. And they will also allow you to kind of prolong the game a little bit so that your opponent doesn't like outcard you to the point where, like you saw last time, I was worried that he had so many turns left that he might have a rain card that could really screw up my my siege line. But this time I have more cards than he does. So even if he has a medic card, which he does, and he pulls the spy card, which he will, and he puts it on my side, it doesn't really matter to me because I've got my decoy, and I can decoy that back into my hand, play it again, and get 2 more cards myself. So he still hasn't gotten... Oh, really? Seriously? So we're going to decoy that card off the board as well and put it in our hand. So now we're only technically 1 card ahead, but even if we give him 5 points, it's really just not going to matter because the cards we're going to draw from our deck are really just going to allow us to outpoint him. So do you understand why I pulled those off We're in the third round, so decoying those off is really the only thing that made sense. Because in the third round, your decoy really is just going to allow you to kind of prolong the game through, unless you're trying to pull cards off the board because you're anticipating something happening. And then giving 5 points back to him in order to get 4 cards, that's a no-brainer. Especially like that. So he's going to put some fog on the board. Does not matter. This is the other reason it's really nice to have Fultist, because at any time we can clear the weather, and that will remove any of the weather effects from the board, which we will do that here before we wrap up. And now we really have so many more cards than he does, and the cards that we have are just beastly, so there's just nothing he's going to be able to do to win this. That's not always going to be true in some cases. There is a card that I've seen called Scorch. Now, granted, there are probably more advanced cards that I haven't seen yet, but this is just a basic tutorial, so we're going to talk about the basics that you're going to run into early in the game. I have seen a card called Scorch, which will allow your opponent to remove cards from the board and destroy them. Not permanently, obviously, but for the sake of the round or the game, they're destroyed. So keep an eye out for that. You may be rocking a badass hand and thinking you're just going to wreck your opponent, and then a Scorch card or 2 get played in a given round, and you go from winning to losing very, very quickly. So you can see that I've got my Cadwini Siege Expert down here on this row right now, and he's actually adding a point to the all the siege engines that were reduced to 1 by the rain. So we're going to continue to stack cards down here because we know that we have our commanders, our leader's special ability to remove all the weather effects, so it does not matter to us. We are going to drop these guys in here as well. And the reason these guys are so effective will become very clear once we clear out the weather. Okay, so he's passed, so he's done. So we could pretty much win the game right now if we wanted to, but I do want to show you a few things. So one is, so you can see when you have 3 of those guys on the board, if we were to clear the weather, so if we do use leader card and then apply, it pretty much casts a clear weather. You don't have to have the card for it. But you can see these 5-point cards, because there are 3 of them, now are worth 15 points each, which is just devastatingly nasty when you stack them up. The other thing to do is to check out our... we'll throw her on the board, and we'll throw Roach on the board. Okay, so for your Commander's Horn, this is going to double the point value of every card in a given row. So you generally want to place it on the row that has the highest point value or the highest anticipated point value. So if I had more siege engines in my hand and I knew I was going to surpass this 45, I may put it down here. Or if you're trying, like we ran into last time, hedge your bets against weather cards, you may put it somewhere else. But we're not going to put it in either one of those rows. We're actually going to put it up here because I want to show you how it affects Vernon Roach. You can see it didn't change his number at all, and that's because your hero cards are not affected by these modification cards like Commander's Horn or Weather or things along those lines. So I thought it was important to point that out. And we're going to play one more game just for good measure.
Or a bit of dry curd. Me lad, it's not exactly...
How about a few rounds of cards?
Everything
Gwent
that could have come up has pretty much come up through these 2 rounds. But we're going to go one more. Alright, 2 Commander's Horns are nice. However, decoys would be nicer. We're going to get rid of him. Damn. And since we don't have a bunch of siege engines, we're going to drop... So it's possible you'll draw siege engines. Well, it's damn likely you're going to draw siege engines with these guys by playing them, but we're going to get rid of him. Yeah. He only really adds 1 point, but he can be useful at times. So in order to get this started, we're going to do the exact same thing we did last game. We're just going to pretty much concede this round. And we do not have decoy cards, which really sucks. Shit. Okay, so we don't have a decoy card, but what we do have now is the ability to pull this spy card that he stuck on our board out of our discard pile with our medic. So we're just going to go ahead and pass. He drew a card. So we're still even on cards right now. And this time we are going to play our medic first and grab that... we're going to play him and see if we can get... Oh, we got a decoy. Good. Because at some point he's going to medic... If he has the medic, he may medic out one of our spy cards. So we just want to be prepared for that. We are just going to... We're going to burn a clear weather. Are we? We're going to burn a clear weather just to see if we get him to pass this round. He does not pass. Okay. So we need to win this round regardless, but we don't want to go all in too heavy right now. So we're going to see what it takes to... Okay. So he's going to give up this round. We are going to actually dump a siege engine on the board to secure the win. The reason I'm doing that is because from a strategy perspective, we have 2 commander's horns. We have 3 of these guys with tight bond. We have 2 of these guys with tight bond. So if we had to stack 2 rows, these would be the 2 rows we stacked with our commander horn. So before we go, that puts us at 11. We have a decoy. Oh, I was considering whether we pull the whether we pull her off the board with our decoy or not. I think we're going to leave her just in case he comes up with a medic and winds up dropping a spy on us to draw cards. So I think we're going to hold off on that and take the win as it is right now for this round and move on. Of all the cards, right? So now we get to go first, and we're going to throw our siege engine on the board here. No particular reason. Just seeing what's going to get played on his side. We'll throw a roach down. And my guess is if he had a medic, he would have already played it. I was trying to bait out the medic with the with some of those early plays and see if it was going to come, but it doesn't look like it's coming. So I think all those spy cards are stuck in his discard pile. You know, we tried to plan for it with saving our decoy, but you can only anticipate so much. You really don't know what they have in their hand, so... And even if you did, it probably wouldn't matter too much as far as that goes. If you knew what weather cards they had, it might matter. But for us, it doesn't matter because we have our leader who can clear all this nasty weather off the board. Alright, so we're going to put our first Commander's Horn on this row here. And he's out of cards now, so we've effectively won. We really don't need to do anything else. You guys know what the Commander's Horn does. You know what the Leader's ability does. There's really no use for us to continue, so we are just going to pass, take the win. And there we go. So that is it for our Gwent tutorial. I hope that answered some questions. I hope I was verbose enough in my descriptions that it gave you a better handle on what was going on, how the game is played, how some rounds get played. Since we went through 9 rounds, or about 9 rounds, we went through 3 games. It gave you a real look at the game and how some of the cards work, what some of the basic strategies are. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them down below in the comments section. If you're one of my Dragon Age viewers, then you know I try to get back to everybody that has questions and help out when I can. So that's it. I hope this helped you out. Thanks for watching. Take care.